When they don't have their QB, who's going to just be the best Terrell Pryor, Braxton Miller, the best athlete in the field, best player on the field, you crack that door a little bit wider for Iowa. Welcome back to the ANF Podcast, where we cover Iowa sports. Today's episode, we're doing a season preview of the 2024 Iowa season.
We're going to do a game-by-game breakdown of our predictions of how teams are going to interact with this Iowa offense and defense. Through that discussion, we're going to illuminate Iowa's strengths and weaknesses, and also hopefully give you guys some detailed conversation on what is successful within college football.
We're not going to do the Illinois State game. We're not going to do the Troy game. We anticipate, a 90% winning percentage in both those games. Obviously, Troy's been a very good program the last 10 years, 20 years. But they have a coaching change, and thus we're not going to break down that team. Illinois State is projected to be not even a top 10 team in the FCS. I think we'll roll them. It might be a game we control 24-3, but for those reasons, we're only going to break down 10 games. In the first game, we're going to break down.
Well, before that, at the top of this, we should also go through our predictions from last year. So we chose both 10-2, which at the time was, I think, a win and a half above Iowa's win-loss percentage. I think we were an 8.5 win-loss percentage last year.
We were bet up. We were originally at 7.5, and actually the public moved an entire game.
It didn't really occur the way we thought it would. I guess it sort of did, because we believed in a strong defense. We knew that we're going to play a lot of weak offenses, that we're going to struggle to score. That's really how the season played out. We didn't predict to lose every single significant offensive player besides Caleb Brown.
Yeah.
But it really shows you when you have a dominant strength in defense and special teams, severe injury to your offense doesn't really matter. It did matter, but if you're going to win games against lower 40F overall teams, you're going to be okay.
What it shows is it shows that if you're going to choose an elite strength for a team at a mid-tier level, choose defense.
Yeah.
And I think last year's win total and last year's experience as an Iowa fan is that Kirk has the right idea of how to run this program. We had the worst quarterback play in the country, and we were able to sneak out 10 wins and a Big Ten West championship against a lot of like programs that were in a lot better situations, 5 games into the season. And I think it just reiterates, if you're going to be elite at one thing, be elite at defense.
Aesthetics matter, but results do too.
Exactly.
All right, but let's go into it.
So we're going to start with Iowa State first. Obviously, this is a really easy game to break down. Campbell's been there since 2015? 2016 was his first year. It's been pretty much the same program since 2018, I want to say. They kind of hit their stride where 2017, they kind of had Hakeem Butler and
Allen
Lazard and Montgomery.
Mitch
Harger. And they had, we played a tough road game against them, and it kind of introduced us to what Iowa State football is going to be for the next, 8 years as it's been. The last 2 years have been a downturn for Campbell's program. They had really struggled 2 years ago, obviously with the suspensions. Actually, not before the suspensions, but Decker's first year, I think they went 4-8. Last year, they were a 7-5 team, but truly, they didn't compete in a lot of games and didn't have any really big wins. I think Kansas State and Oklahoma State were their best 2 wins, but they bring back probably top 5 production level coming into this year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how such a young team, and probably they say Campbell's youngest team, is going to transition into this year.
Well, I think with any middle tier college football team, you're going to be cyclical. And especially when they don't really have high-end offensive line talent. Their skill is probably middle of the pack. You mix those two things together, and you're going to be good every 3 or 4 years. Iowa's been able to kind of break that cycle every so often. But even for a top 25 program that you'd probably put Iowa in, it still is cyclical. But we might experience a more fundamental, more sound Iowa State team than we have in the past simply because of that experience. Why I think we can also lean towards this being maybe a comfortable win. I want to say it's comfortable just because it's going to be a Cy-Hawk and there's going to be a lot of emotion involved. But as you're moving into the late third, early fourth, you might see an Iowa team emerge that's just simply better.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great game to start breaking down, is that line of scrimmage is going to be the kind of the focus of every single game this year. Honestly, maybe Ohio State's the only team that's going to push our buttons along with Wisconsin on the line of scrimmage. And that's been a microcosm of the Iowa State series under Campbell. Against every other Big 12 program, maybe against Texas, Iowa State has an equal opportunity to move the offense and defensive lines the way they want to and at least be competitive. And what separated Iowa in these last, series against Campbell is that the inability of Iowa State to score in the red zone and to punish Iowa on the ground, because their system requires that. They are a short passing game system. But you put their system in a 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, which they invariably will get to at some point in the game, it's going to fall apart. And it has on a consistent basis against Iowa. And so I don't expect that to change this year for this series. Obviously, Iowa State brings back an enormous offensive line, their biggest ever. They bring back a bunch of starts, I think at least 4 starts, maybe 5 on the offensive line. But the way Iowa's recruited and developed our line, defensive line for sure, that just hasn't mattered. We are the premier defensive line producers in the Midwest. And if you don't win that advantage, the way these teams play, of not allowing big plays and focusing on turnover margin, the run game is kind of the first part of that. Where if you can't run the ball, then it's going to allow you, then you're going to have more turnovers.
Well, I think everyone knows within a football team when you are running with numbers. So if you line up in the first play of the game and it's a numbers advantage in the box, you have your inside zone call that everyone knows in the book that we audible to this if we get this look. And if that goes for 2, that goes for 3, the anxiety of your OC, the anxiety of your QB, everyone on the whole sideline knows that's not the outcome you wanted there. And that's your jab that he just slipped.
Yeah.
And if they continue to slip that jab, you can't really build a holistic offense out of not having inside zone, not out of having that jab. And I think that's what a lot of teams are just going to experience this year, is that we can line up and just square you up, and we're going to say, okay, our triangle of ABA, where you're going Graves, Yaya, and Higgins, that's where football is played. A lot of people don't play football, don't understand that, like, between guard, center guard, and D-tackle, middle linebacker, that's a whole game within itself. And if that is a loss, everything gets pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. And now you're going to play into Iowa's true strike this year, where the way they develop their team is everything that happens to the flats, these guys are bigger and stronger than you've seen in this spot pretty much anywhere else in college football. And then the backside picture is the most sophisticated zone you'll see, where they all know exactly what their read is. They can drop guys and they can raise guys. You have no idea which player's coming up, which player's coming down. And that whole equation is just a very rare one for young QBs to experience. Even teams who have had years and years, Campbell, PJ Fleck, all these tenured coaches still struggle with that equation because it's not actually about drawing up really well done plays. It's about just being the tougher team. And Iowa spends August, September, October becoming the tougher team. And then they put you in that equation. They don't put you in the numbers equation. They don't put you in who's got the faster guys.
They give you the numbers equation.
Exactly.
And they say, you better not just get 4
if
yards.
We're going to go 5 on 6 and it looks ugly.
Yeah.
Then everyone knows what the game is the rest of the time.
Exactly. Both coordinators do.
Yeah.
Both, everyone on the field understands what's happening.
And that's what they've done to Iowa State for almost all of Campbell's. And he's had stellar backs in Montgomery, Breece Hall. And it's still never really changed because you have to move the guys before they can run.
Yeah, and I think if you could envision a loss this year of why that would happen, is that because you have the same group offensively for Iowa State and Higgins, Noel, and Becht and their O-line and the continuity they have of problem solving against this team. And last year's game, the result was not nearly as close as the game was. Iowa was up 17 and put the game on ice. They allowed Iowa State to chew their own clock in the fourth quarter. I mean, you're talking about 7 first down conversions in the third and fourth quarter when they're up 2 scores. And the Iowa State crowd was kind of complaining that they weren't moving faster. Iowa controlled the complete game.
If Coop and X don't run into each other, the game ends in the mid-third quarter.
And just in their inability to be aggressive down the stretch, Iowa to close that game out made it seem closer. But they were in complete control. But now you have a program that's a year older. And Becht's skill and what he does best is short passing. Really quick release, really knows where the ball's going. Even early in last year's game, the first drive, understood of what matchups he wants to attack. And you saw it. They would go trips right, Higgins on the left, solo receiver, and attack Deshaun Lee in a one-on-one situation on a slant pass. They did it 3 times until Lee kind of broke it up. They would put 2 tight ends on the field and then isolate one of our linebackers, Fisher against one of their stronger tight ends. They have it. Brommer's coming back. He's a good tight end. Noel's a good slot. Higgins a good deep ball guy. They're going to know what they want to attack and with who. I think that's the difference is when you're an older team, you understand the strengths and weaknesses of your own players, and then you can use that in your game plan. That is the advantage I see this year for them. Why it won't be such a differentiated game in terms of 17 points in the second half. Will that be enough? I don't know. But they have the starting point of, I do think that they'll have success between the 20s until you get to the third and fourth quarter where we start learning how you're going to attack us. We've seen the same formations and the same plays. And then what it really comes down to the fourth quarter is just handing the ball off against a light box and running without being guessed. And if you are guessed, you still run. And I think that's where I don't see this changing because their line of scrimmage has never been stronger. And under Campbell, I don't think it ever will be stronger than Kirk's.
I think they're just going to be consistently put into third and medium situations, and Higgins, Noel, and Brahmer just are not a head above the Iowa secondary. And they showed it last year. They had moments. Higgins was able to abuse Lee at the top of routes. Now you have a bigger guy out there, Nestor. If we were going into this game with Lee, and there's going to be Lee on Higgins in multiple jump ball situations, I'd be pretty worried about it. But since we upgraded in size at that position, they're going to have to find somewhere else to go. I think it's going to be Noel. I think essentially every team that has a good slot receiver this year is going to be where you attack. And as we go farther into this breakdown, I think that's what we're going to keep on fleshing out. But I think we just keep on breezing through just so we can get up to all these teams.
Yeah, what's your final score?
Final score, I think I'll go 27-16. I think it's a year where they have the ability to move the ball between the 20s. Our corner play is going to be an issue early in the game. But when it comes down to, are you creative enough in your design on the goal line to confuse this defense? No.
Yeah.
Do you have a player you can go to on the goal line that's going to get open? No.
We focus most of this breakdown on their offense versus our defense. Just do a quick one on their defense. They bring back everybody again, but there is not many NFL players in that team. Cooper, their safety, is probably the only one that I'm really, kind of flashes on film. Their front seven was the worst they've had under Campbell last year. They were like 100th and 110th in pass rush. They don't really have the athletes they usually have in their front seven.
Yeah.
All those guys come back, I don't care.
If it's Peterson in 23,
yeah,
I think Peterson's 55. If those two guys are playing in C gap or D gap the entire game, watch for power action them. Watch for everything in our offense designed to come to those two guys. They are not high level D1 football players.
Yeah. They just were too small last year.
And we were able to run power at them the entire game. We didn't run power on anyone all season besides them. I think they are a little bit light in the ass at the end. And returning those guys, you're returning a lot of players. I don't care with that group.
Yeah,
we're going to keep on attacking you in that fashion. They might get then overly aggressive in the run game. Exactly. I think that's going to be a premier thing for them. And they might actually end up employing what a lot of teams do against us, where it's like, hey, just line up and blitz them and play press man out wide. Right. They don't have the bodies outside. So we'll see if they actually change their system. But yeah.
I think I'll go with 21-13. I think Iowa takes control, 2-score lead, maybe a 10-point lead at some point in the second half, and kind of not coast to victory, but seems like they have it in hand in the fourth quarter.
We are thrilled to announce a new sponsor of the ANF Podcast. Next time you're looking for an all-inclusive beach vacation, consider Via Puesta del Sol or Via Puerto Escondido, both of which overlook the Pacific Ocean in Ocotal, Costa Rica, providing an exceptional all-inclusive experience for your family and friends. And if you mention the ANF Podcast when booking, you'll get 5% off your stay. Visit their website, linked down below, for more information or to reserve your trip today.
Next critical game we're going to discuss is the Minnesota game. And it's honestly, it's probably the hardest road game of our season. And it's weird to break that down, that at Minnesota is probably, other than Ohio State, obviously, but your second hardest road game for this year.
Yeah, they obviously had Athan leave their team. Their QB room right now doesn't have a single P5 D1 start. Hosmer, who they brought in, or Brosmer? Brosmer. It's disrespectful to say his name wrong. I'm glad I did. Brosmer came in from New Hampshire, watched a lot of his film. He had actually surprising, really good receiver play for him. I think that allowed him to put higher numbers than he did. He's got that kind of middle tier 15 to 20 yard throw that you see with Tanner Morgan. He seems to be an on-time QB, but he looks a little clunky. He still looks a little mechanical, especially in his dropbacks. I didn't see anything special from him from the athletic perspective, which I really look for against teams that we play with Iowa, because we just don't account for QBs in the run game. And if you can continually hit that jab, that's something we've actually struggled with in the past. They don't have super high-end receiver play, but it's good enough to at least move the ball on us. Jackson's a real player.
He's high-end, in my opinion. I think there was enough plays last year against Michigan State, Nebraska. he can make plays. I don't think it's a differentiator between Iowa, just given the secondary we have. But if you just look at the scope of the Big Ten, I would rate him as
above average receiver.
A top 8, top 5 receiver in the Big Ten.
I don't know if I'll go as high as top 5, but he's a good player.
Yeah.
But where we really struggle is when you put that NFL receiver on the field.
Yeah.
O-line's they're going to be dominant, and that's really where they've been successful against Iowa these past couple of years. Is they can line up and we have the invitation of run your inside zone, and they go, okay, we'll take that for 6.
Yeah.
And when they have, especially when they're going to be at home this year, and you're not going to have the same energy in the room for us stopping the run, and you're going to have the O-line playing with a little more confidence, being a little more on time, not having snap count issues, you're likely going to see them run the ball fairly well between the 20s. Where the system has fallen apart has been within the red zone against us. I can't remember the last time they scored a red zone touchdown against us. It's been
a long time.
Yeah.
And I
guess Mo had one early the first half of 2 years ago's game.
Yeah, it was like 7 yards out.
Yeah. But that might be the first one in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think just evaluating even Brosmer too, I think it's hard to discount his film in a way. He's obviously like 6'1". He's not a very athletic guy. He'll be able to scramble for third down, so they're not going to run him. But when you watch him, he's an accurate guy over the middle. And you can
watching completions.
You're trying to replicate Tanner Morgan, which is what they should be doing. Athan was not the fit for their system. They're trying to throw 10-yard ins, 8-yard slants, 15-yard floating post. Everything towards, between the hashes. And they found the guy to do it. Like, he's got a good motion. If he was honestly on Iowa this year as our backup QB, I wouldn't take him over Cade. But if he was like the next in line guy for an even next year, I'd be like, this is what I would want. I want this point guard type of quarterback to run our offense. He doesn't scream the, Van Dyke type of arm or other QBs, but he has the ability just to run an offense that's going to run the ball for 200 yards a game. And I think he marries well with it, where I don't think I want to talk down about him, because I think he actually, if he throws 14 times a game, he might go 12 or 14. And it's going to be one of those like Tanner Morgan, not 2019 Tanner Morgan, but 2021, 22 Tanner Morgan, where he kind of more threw for 150, but it was like he only had 2 incompletions.
I just don't see the arm strength that is going to put the fear within Iowa's defense.
Not
I think
Iowa.
we're going to play,
Yeah.
and we just defend over the middle of the field so well.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm just talking about our game with them.
Yeah.
If you're going to rely on 15-yard throws in the middle of the field against Iowa, that's a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
And why Athan, he really failed to throw the ball outside the numbers last year. It was actually a really poor effort. He essentially broke his brain after that game, how many balls he put in the dirt. But he had at least the capability to put the ball outside the numbers, which makes Iowa think for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that possibility, then unless they're running for 250 in this game, 200, and we make some turnovers, I feel very comfortable with putting Brosmer versus Iowa.
Yeah, I think another thing they did in the offseason too was obviously Darius Taylor's, he has a chance to be all Big Ten this year. I think he flashed in some games as a freshman. It'll be interesting to stay healthy. I mean, I think he had 2 separate injuries last year, and PJ is known for running his running backs into the dirt. Like, if you're the number one, you're getting 30 carries, and you're getting 30 even when we're up by 2 scores. He's not going to save your legs. He's trying to get stats. But then they bring in 3 former starters from D1 programs. And that type of, when you kind of envision their offense, they don't have the receiver skills or tight ends that's going to push our buttons, but they're going to try to run the ball 35 times at home. And they have plenty of backs, and they have the O-line to do it. So there's a concern there, especially being on the road, that they could just naturally drag you into the game they've dragged you into the last 6 years, where it's going to be a really short game. They're not going to turn the ball over. They're not going to commit penalties. And their defense is so predicated on stopping the run, we're not going to have the ability to naturally drive against them more than maybe 3 times.
Well, I think the crux of the equation will be how well does Cade, Lachey, Caleb play against Minnesota's pass defense. When we've had success against them and had high point totals, it's always in the passing game, because they build their entire defense around stopping the run, and they put their secondaries on the island. The reason that fell apart last year is because you had potentially the worst passing game in FBS history. But I think early in the season, less worried about having injuries at that time. Lachey, Caleb, and Cade, those 3 guys should make easy work of the Minnesota secondary in a manner. And there are guys in the second, like Wale's good. but they really have a lot of question marks elsewhere, and they just put so much on their plate. I think we're going to be a very aggressive team against them. I think you're going to see 65, 70% pass early on, especially in the first half, unless we take a quick lead. And I also think we're going to see a lot of canned plays because any Iowa fan knows we save a fair amount for this game. Kirk has Minnesota at least 2 or 3 on his highest priority wins of the season. You always see somewhat of trick plays. You definitely see canned plays for the system. And I think the reason that it works really well against Minnesota is because they trust so much in their defensive backfield.
Well, I think the big change, too, on their defensive side of the ball is that they have a new coordinator coming in. They obviously lose Rossi to Michigan State. And Rossi really had simplified them to be a man-focused defense, but in the same way Iowa focused on defense of having very limited plays, not focused on getting negative plays, but stopping the explosive plays. It'll be interesting. It sounds like this coordinator is going to be more of a blitzer, more of trying to create turnovers, and that doesn't really marry with what PJ has had success with. I mean, he fired his first defensive coordinator for that very reason, who was trying to force turnovers to become more of a Phil Parker type of defense. And if he doesn't, marry that, that defense, then I could see us having even explosive run game plays where you blitz into the wrong area, you get walled down, and you have an opportunity to score. So it'll be interesting how, with the change in coordinators, if PJ's philosophy of how he wants to play defense still lives on, where you're just trying to create long drives and execution over time, or more of like a Lovie Smith type where you're hoping for a strip sack, you're hoping for a tip pass, you're hoping for that confusing defense.
Nervous QB.
And that's what Rossi, watch every game. First and second down, same play every time. Get you into a 3rd and 4, all of a sudden we're dropping 8. All of a sudden we're blitzing 9 or like blitzing 8. And it just was impossible to guess what he was going to do on 3rd down because it looked like his 1st and 2nd down, just like Phil would do. And it'll be interesting how this new guy kind of approaches defense for Minnesota.
Well, it sounds like they might be moving to a 3-3-5 set, which is going to be interesting because their D-line is built so big. If they're going to have those quicker linebackers, and then I think really the strength of their team right now is their D-line. So you're taking those guys off the field to put more speed on the field.
They bring back
and that might be a benefit for playing everyone besides Iowa, but we might be salivating on the opportunity to play only 3 guys above 270.
Yeah, and it's for sure their strength. Their D-line, they go A deep of guys that have been in the program for a long time. How Iowa's built out their defensive line to be a really, crazy group in that second deep. Like you look at Minnesota's 2 deep, they've done the same way, getting through transfers, developing guys for 4 years. They got plenty of bodies, and their linebacking room is pretty similar this year too. So what's your final prediction for the game?
I will go 16-10. I think it's going to be a very ugly game, but I think if Iowa takes control early, that Minnesota's going to really struggle to move the ball. They do have a size advantage at the end, which is my one worry. But putting the ball in the hands of Jackson, Higgins, Castro, Schulte, and X, I feel very comfortable with us stopping the run over the long period of time.
Yeah, I think this is you have the first time in a long time Iowa has a chip in this game, and when you don't have a chip in a rivalry game, you're the team with 7 straight wins. It's hard to always get up to start games. Maybe not start games, but maybe this first and second quarter where any play happens, you still have to kind of keep your composure. But both teams are very understanding of what happened last year. Both programs are. And Minnesota, they can't get up for this game this year. In my opinion, like the emotion is on our side, which is rare for this series. Because they understand that there's a group of 100 psychos. The most psycho team you play every year is now pissed. They're coming up to Minneapolis angry and wanting to hurt you. And I don't know if Minnesota can channel that to try to, replicate that type of energy we're going to have. And it's kind of like Iowa going to Iowa State last year. It's like, you think you guys actually are a better team than us? Like, we fumble on the 1-inch line.
Yeah, we're going to show this is a fluke now.
We're going to show it's a fluke. And if you have a momentum play or a big play in the first half, a pick, a strip, a touchdown over 50 yards, and you can feel that, IOWA chant come in, you feel that Go Hawks chant come in to this game, I could see it being, it's kind of you thought you broke the streak, but that wasn't a streak breaker.
Yeah, now it's 10.
Yeah. Big Brother's still here. Yeah. And that's a situation I think it could be, and I think it will be a similar game, what you're saying. I think it's going to be 20-13, just similar to Iowa State game where, I think our skill and the depth of our offense actually this year with the amount of running backs and tight ends and receivers we have that we can use against this defense. We'll come in early in the game. I think we'll have some well-scripted plays, as you mentioned. And I think their offense still struggled last year with this exact same personnel with just a different QB. And I think
they took a step down in QB. I truly do. I think Ethan had a lot more in the arm department. And that's where I look to just arm strength purely when you're playing Iowa football, because you have to put the ball on the line outside the numbers. If you can't make that throw, the entire game's going to get really difficult unless you have like an Isaiah Washington that Paddock could use, where he's the fastest player on the field and he's played in the NFL over the middle. If you don't have that, it's going to be a tough day for you.
Yeah. Next game, Ohio State then?
Yep.
Well, when you break down Ohio State and you look at their weaknesses, you're trying to find a hole in their team. You look at their defense first, which is a top 5 unit last year. They bring back essentially everyone back. It's like 9 returning starters, maybe 10 even. Mm-hmm. They add in Caleb Downs from Alabama. It's going to be an unreal unit. Obviously, their coordinator is world class. We're going to have a really hard time scoring against this team, especially on the road, especially when you're not going to get any calls. Like, there's a reality when Iowa goes on the road to Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. The refs aren't on our side. You're not going to get the PI. You're not going to get that holding call. You might get it once a game to keep it within the touchdown, but you're not getting early in the game. But where I see the weakness of this team is their transfer QB they brought in. Like, you watch Will Howard, and he reminds me of a little bit of Graham Mertz in terms of obviously he's 6'4", 230, he can run. He's a really talented guy, but his motion is a little funky. And you look at his stats, he's under 60% completion on his career. He played 4 years off and on at K-State, and he got beat out by a redshirt freshman that's going to be a Heisman contender at K-State. So he couldn't even start at K-State. So Ohio State, they maybe got the best QB in the portal, but they didn't get the guy they wanted. This is not a Stroud. This is not a Fields. And when they don't have their QB, who's going to just be the best Terrell Pryor, Braxton Miller, the best athlete in the field, best player in the field, you crack that door a little bit wider for Iowa. And I think that's the situation we are in this year, because the rest of their supporting cast was only a top 45 offense last year based on their offensive line and the run game, which kind of both struggled to run the ball last year with the same personnel. Obviously, had Junkinson, but it just seems like there's like a more of a sliver of hope in this game there has been in the year prior, going to these kind of big name opponents on the road.
Yeah, that was my first takeaway when I watched him. I was like, this is just not what we usually see from an Ohio State QB. And while that doesn't mean you're going to go out and win the game or even compete within a score, I think if I was going to look at this as a success, trying to keep it within 2 scores in the third quarter is where you should be. But I also see a realm where their run game isn't acting as a machine, and then you have to rely on Howard against a really good secondary. Mm-hmm. And they don't really have that like surefire first round receiver this year. I'm sure there's some guy laying in wait that's going to be high end. And that's going to be the most talented receiver core we play all year. But why this is always usually counted as an auto loss when you go play Ohio State is because of their QB and receiver talent. Those are both, I would just say above average. Will Howard has some insane Heisman odds, but just because he plays for
I would
Ohio
say
State.
Their receivers are not above average. I'd say they're elite this year.
I'd say they are, but it's not to the level where you're playing like Garrett Wilson and Jigba, Olave on one team where you have 3 first rounders.
Yeah.
Like you might have 3 NFL draft picks in the top 3 rounds, but it's not that overwhelming force where you're just going to back up until you get to the red zone and hope for the best. And really, we saw Iowa compete in 2022 with a horrible offense, but the defense showed up for the first half and actually made things really tough on Ohio State because they are a team that is built around being explosive. They don't really know how to be patient. In that game we're talking about where you have to line up in shotgun and handoff against inside zone because you have numbers isn't very fun for Ohio State to do because they don't want to play that game. They don't want to play the 6-possession game where you can make one play and be in it. They want to speed the game up. They want to make plays. They want to recruit receivers and QBs, as we've talked about in the past. So when you can make a team that wants to be explosive be patient and play outside their normal selves, where Ohio State probably, I bet 9 to 10 games this year is going to see predominantly man-to-man teams where all the action is occurring at 10 to 12 yards. And if their team, a guy wins at 10 to 12 yards, they go for 60. Against Iowa, everything happens between yards 1 and 7. And it happens 1 and 7 over and over again. It's going to usually require 10 plays to action against. That level of discipline and focus and all that is tied into being a consistent on-time team, they really only do probably against Penn State, Michigan, and that's only usually in the first half because eventually Michigan and Penn State line up and press man and make you throw. But that patience and it breeds so much anxiety within OCs that if you get these really high-level teams in that quagmire of a game, are they going to be able to, blow you out of the water in the fourth if they just feel out of sorts the whole time?
Yeah. I would push back. The only thing I would push back on is just that Chip Kelly is now their OC. And Chip Kelly's kind of number one thing is running the ball. Like, it's kind of what he prides himself in. It's maybe why he was hired and maybe what he sold himself on. Maybe watching Ohio State games. We've struggled watching them in the past because you can tell they want to be explosive. They don't want to drive the field, length of the field. They get lazy. They get kind of impatient. Kelly has kind of prided himself always with playing that numbers game. And with the backs they have, if they do play the numbers game, they don't, get obsessed with trying to have 45 attempts in the passing game to recruit these quarterbacks and receivers. We're going to have a really hard time stopping those backs. The transfer from Ole Miss is a great player. I think his comparison for him would be Kareem Hunt. And he's going to have that kind of same profile in the NFL. And he's going to go to the NFL pretty easily. Travion Henderson it's been a weird kind of story. Obviously, I think his first game of his career at Minnesota, he had a 70-yard touchdown. And everyone's like, this is the 5-star from Texas. He's going to be a pro in 3 years and be a first-round pick. And he's just never really done it. Injuries, been beat out by other guys. But having two of those guys with Kelly, it concerns me where they might get very comfortable just going for 6. And they returned 4 stars in the O-line. It just depends what that decision is. Do they embrace that run game as a need to against us? Because we will give it to them the entire game. We saw it at Penn State this year. When we're the worst team on the road against a premier program, we want to drag you to the fourth, and we want to drag you into 85-yard drives on 12 plays. Even if we do have some advantages in the secondary, we're going to just back up. And so it all kind of comes down to that decision-making.
Well, hopefully we just don't make the early mistakes. As we pointed out in the past, against these top teams, we seem to always have a second quarter, mess up, whether it's a punt hitting off someone's back, a punt return against Michigan in the Big Ten title game. The reason this style has fallen apart recently is because of uncharacteristic, faux pas.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see an all-time shell offense out of Iowa as they attack this Ohio State defense. You could go through, 9 of their guys are going to be NFL draft picks easily. But what you can do when you're built like Iowa and you're the tough guy team is you can line up in 22 personnel, throw 2 tight ends on the field, throw your fullback on the field, and now you're making them play big. And their big players are still good, but it's not the level of difference that you would see from our receiver talent against their DBs.
Yeah.
And that also then feeds into the shorter game. And if this game's going to be competitive, it's going to have to be a masterful special teams game from Iowa. It's going to be a masterful game from their defense.
Red zone
and
defense,
then the true stars on Iowa's offense are going to have to play lights out. But there's enough NFL talent on Iowa's offense between Cade Lachey and Caleb that I truly believe against one-on-one against Ohio State's players, they have a chance to be effective. It's not going to be large plays, but staying on time, making a couple first downs, getting to the 50, executing that well-executed punt.
Yeah.
It's always going to be the same equation for Iowa against these good teams, but it's why they had that in their bag.
And you bring up 2 great points, like last year against Penn State and last year against Michigan, and it's been kind of a string of games. We just have blown these opportunities, kind of proved the idea of why Iowa plays the way we do, is through just massive special team issues or turnovers. Like I think even going back to the 2019 game against Michigan on the road, which was a huge game for our program, we fumbled on the very first play of the game on a draw to Mackay. I think we're going to have the opportunity. Like, obviously, I think turnovers are going to happen if they're going to happen. It's not, no one on this personnel is going to change the turnovers, and if we can just relax in these big games. But I think this offense has an opportunity to get first downs. And Cade being in this game really helps us. You think about a short passing game QB who can make really quick decisions and understand mismatches with Lachey and maybe Ostranga. Maybe in the running game, or the running backs in the passing game, you have a clear out where you have a running back in a one-on-one situation and he makes a quick decision to pick up a first down. First downs are going to be vital to keeping our defense locked into this game and keeping it tight, because you have to drag this team to the fourth quarter, even if you're down by 7. If it's 12 minutes left in the game and we kick a field goal to go down by 4 with 8 minutes left in the game, then it flips. And we've seen the flips happen in our program's history. 2021 Penn State, instantly, when we took a lead or made it a little bit closer, it felt like no way we're going to lose. Like 2008, Penn State, 2016, Michigan, the worst team, 2017, Penn State, even the one we didn't win. When the worst team starts making plays, it kind of snowballs late. And we haven't had the opportunity to be the worst team, kind of making that crazy comeback and those crazy plays where the better team gets tight. And I really just want to see it happen this year. At least give us the opportunity where this type of style play it makes sense to play these top teams with.
Well, I think it's not an auto loss. I think that's the key part when we're going to break out our prediction for the whole season.
Yeah.
Is you're at like 15%, maybe 10% chance in comparison to usually be like a 2% chance. And that's because of how he broke out Will Howard.
Yeah.
He's not this surefire first rounder. He's not maybe even a top 4 round QB.
I don't think he's going to get, I think he might get drafted in the NFL. He will never play a snap in the NFL, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, he's not that level.
And with that equation, you're playing an Iowa defense that has,
NFL
7-8 NFL guys playing.
Yeah. All right, I think it's time. What's your final prediction for it?
35-0. No, I think they'll struggle to score. I think it'll be like a 27-17 game.
Ooh, that's a lot of points.
I think we're going to have moderate success. That could be a late touchdown too.
Yeah, I think it's a late touchdown.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned 20%, 15% chance of winning this game.
You have to remember, like, our O-line is going to show up with, 5 seniors.
I think
7 guys that are seniors.
It just takes one break.
Yeah.
I think it just takes one break for this team to get rolling, for everyone to relax, for us to kind of are we going to do this?
You have experienced running back play.
Yeah.
You have experienced receiver play. Everyone's been around each other for a while too.
I'll go 27-10 in the same kind of line. I think maybe we score a touchdown in the first half, make it a little interesting. But I think what the real concern is our defense is just going to have an overwhelming amount of defensive line talent.
It's the line is going to disappear every play.
Yeah.
It's just going to be how quick can you get the ball out? Can that guy break a tackle after he gets out? So they're just going to keep on playing that over and over again.
And Cade's going to have to play. This is if you want to circle a game where if you can. I think Minnesota's the first game where you circle. Cade can start changing his narrative about being NFL and like having a different kind of view of himself and the fan base to view him differently. Minnesota's that first step because he's going to have to throw in that game. The second game is this game. If Cade can have a performance where he can drag Iowa into a fourth quarter game against Ohio State, and he knows this too, NFL scouts start going, oh, this is pro style QB. He won Big Ten title and beat Ohio State and Michigan. It can flip him quickly to have it's going to be a nationally televised game. Like, I think this is a turning point for his career, possibly.
Certainly. Hopefully he can just come up with a healthy receiver base because I think he has all the talent within him.
Yeah.
All right. So now Washington.
We are happy to announce a new sponsor for the ANF Podcast. The ANF Podcast is sponsored by Eye Surgeons Associates, proudly serving Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois for all your eye care needs for over 40 years.
Yeah. Is it Washington? Yeah,
Washington.
It's a hilarious. It's just a new schedule. You bring in the Pac-12 teams. You go from a tough road game against Minnesota, tough road game against Ohio State. Oh, here's Washington at home.
So they're a completely new program. Whole starting lineup cleared out on both sides of the ball. New OC, new head coach, new DC. Brought in Will Rogers from Mississippi State. Had a really prolific SEC career. We watched some tape on him over the past couple days. How I was talking about those QBs with weaker arm talents. Yes, he has got great ball placement. Yes, he's an athlete. Yes, he's won a lot of games within the SEC. He doesn't scare me from how are we going to handle this guy? It's just he might make enough plays to win, but it's not going to be this overwhelming effort where, oh, wow, that QB just killed us today.
Yeah. I think the one concern with him is his experience. In back-to-back years, he had over 8,000 yards passing. And
combined.
Yeah, no, in 2 years, combined, he had 8,000 yards passing. And the simplistic looks that Iowa gives on a daily a down-by-down basis, obviously we execute them very well and we can beat multiple. If you give him a little bit of skill talent, which it feels like they've brought in the transfer portal, they brought in some guys that have been former 4-stars and had decent careers at other schools. I could see it, in a 4-wide situation, 4 receivers on the field, where he can drive the field, 3 or 4 times. Not put him, touchdowns, but put him in field goal range and maybe have a one-on-one ball.
Definitely that. And I think where my confidence in Iowa comes in is because of our longevity.
Mm-hmm.
You have guys on the team that have started 3 or 4 years in the defensive backfield. You have coaches that have taught this position or system for 20 some odd years. I I think that shows up in these new college football programs that emerge every year, and why Iowa's had sustained success over the last 20 years and Kirk's tenure is because he keeps this continuity together. So when you play Iowa, and you don't have familiarity, how Iowa lines up is, especially on defense, is we give you the same look over and over and over again. And you have to run your different iterations of how you beat that system over and over and over again. You're playing then a very sophisticated zone defense on the opposite side who knows where they're going to be attacked. Essentially, your 3 or 4 ways that you can attack them. And how they can counter it is just more sophisticated than how you can counter it because you've just been teaching these guys for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I think that's truly where the separation occurs, why you see Iowa win late game, why you see Iowa be oddly passive, down 3, down 6, giving ground while tied in a game, is because they know they have the trump card at the end. Mm-hmm. And that teaching and that belief they have in their system is what consistently shows up and then wins the game late. Mm-hmm. It's because they can show you the same picture 12 different times, but then they have that 13th reveal. And that's what most teams can't offer because they don't have the depth of knowledge. They don't have the player continuity, the coaching continuity, and all that.
And this team, Washington's almost an impossible team to break down other than their quarterback play. They're returning 1 starter out of 22. It's a completely new staff. They brought in some, Steve Belichick's their defensive coordinator. Jed Fish did a great job at Arizona. But the continuity issue they're going to have of bringing in, a bunch of people just never worked together and trying to put together an offense that makes sense. They'll have flashes, but I think what you made a great point of is like throughout a course of a game, continuity and longevity will take effect, especially halftime adjustments. You got to think of Iowa knows exactly the responses they want to make on the defensive side to attack this offense. Will Washington have that enough discussions amongst themselves, over the next 6 months to even create a game plan that, could reach out to have that many counters? And I think that's where you see programs like UCLA, Washington, and Michigan State we're going to be playing this year. They're all going to be in their infancy. And I don't remember the last time Iowa lost to a first-year program.
Purdue?
Yeah, Purdue in
2016.
Yeah, that was probably it. So there's been one opportunity where we've lost to it, and it's Brom has had the best idea of all time.
We've never been happier to see a coach leave the Big Ten than Jeff Brom.
Brom he understood how to make the game a one-on-one game.
Well, I think what he did the best, and what I actually want to talk about today is teams that have coached their guys in a way that they can execute the high level skill that's required to beat Iowa. Mm-hmm. And that's what Phil knows is most teams play man-to-man press. Most teams are playing these very simplistic, aggressive teams.
Yeah.
And then you finally have to step into a game where the defense is thinking against you.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to handle it. There isn't things just revealed to them. They have to think through the problems. And thinking through the problems in a high-stress environment, you're in Kinnick Stadium, you're nervous, you're not that smart, you're 21. It always ends up being power.
Yeah. So what do you have for? I think there's not much to break down for Washington.
We don't think the quarterback's that high end, and they're going to have skill talent, but I think the continuity is what falls short.
Yeah, and they've been a top 15 program for the last 10 years. Like every year, Washington's. They're making playoff runs. They've been really,
they're 5.5 wins for a reason.
Exactly. They will be a good team in probably a year from now. But to have that quick of a turnaround against a team like Iowa, I think we'll win 24-7.
Yeah.
Maybe 24-10.
Yeah. I think the offense will have success, and I think their offense will really struggle to put the pieces together.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next game. Michigan State. Very similar situation. New program. Obviously hit the transfer portal and brought in a top 50 QB in Childs. It was one of those situations where we had to watch like 7 or 8 QBs this year, and you kept on feeling good about who we were going to play in terms of Van Dyke and Brosmer and, majority of the QBs we reviewed, but then you threw on his film and it felt like a different story, and it felt like a familiar story of how you beat Iowa, which is with just a freaky QB.
Yeah, we don't account for the QB in the run game. So if you can put a dynamic athlete out there who can get into space, make guys miss, just getting all the hidden yardage in football, Iowa is a very fast defense this year, faster than they usually are, especially at D end. At corner, I think they're going to tackle really well. So these guys aren't going to be as dangerous as they used to be in the past, where you'd see like Iowa, 08 Iowa play these spread QBs. But when I watched this film, I just got kind of sick to my stomach because like, man, you put him on the edge 15 times with our players. Mm-hmm. This isn't a very good team, but it's going to end up being a very good, difficult game because of him alone. Yeah. And they have a very good running back to pair with him. Right. So if you have guys going both directions who have talent, I think the odds of them staying in a close game with Iowa is going to be better than most people think, just because of their win total and being a new team and struggling the year prior. Mm-hmm. But QB is the most important position on the team, and they probably had the best player
on the field.
Yeah.
And they, oddly enough, with a new head coach and the transfer portal, they've returned like 10 starters on defense. So a defense that struggled last year, obviously they were pretty poor on both sides of the ball. They're going to have a good amount of veterans on the defensive end. And Michigan State's recruited at a top 35 clip for, last 20 years through D'Antonio. Always had talented players, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think we'll expect a team that will flash with a few NFL players and obviously, is it Holiday? Their middle linebacker. They have enough talent that they can get stops against us, especially on the road. And then you add in this kind of dynamic quarterback. It could be one of those kind of trap games where you could be a one-loss team looking forward to playing.
They rank like 12th in the country at the time.
Right. Playing, Wisconsin coming up and a few other big games. And you just kind of overlook this game. And this head coach, he's won with lesser talent his entire career. Like at least the last 5 years at Oregon State. He's Pac-12 Coach of the Year in 2022. He's done it with having the worst team in probably half his games. Generally probably 6 games he plays a year with Oregon State probably has lesser talent. He knows how to create a style of play, even in his first year with that type of quarterback. I think he could drag us into a game very quickly, understanding that if we just punt it deep and play defense and let this guy play on offense, we can make this a one-score game very quickly.
Yeah, and again, our hope is that they don't have enough iterations to complicate things.
Yep.
They're going to be a first-year program, but you're starting to get into that late 6 or 7 game mark where they're starting to become more familiar with themselves. They know what makes them good, what makes them bad.
Yeah,
they can start adjusting in kind. So
it's almost not a first-year program.
And I think the reason this schedule ends up being as scary it is because you have these just randomly thrown in road games with middle-tier teams where if you put together a special start, you're going to be a ranked team and you're going to draw some attendance. So, Michigan State might show up. UCLA might show up with their crowd. Maryland might even show up. I think when we played them when we were 6-0 that one year, they had a sellout for about a quarter and a half until they were down by 30. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue that might complicate itself. Hopefully the inverse occurs where you have these teams start poor and then they don't have the environment they usually would for when Iowa goes on the road.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, too, about just the odd road games we have this year. I think it's the fact that you don't play Purdue and you don't play the Illini this year. And thus you enter this world of teams you haven't scouted for the last 10 years and really know their personnel, their coaching staff. And it's going to be interesting how Kirk adapts to it. You have to go to the West Coast where you always struggle. You have to go to the East Coast. You have to play Michigan State in the middle of the season where you've played them twice in the last 7 years. And it just allows us to see how Iowa can perform with the talent we have against these programs that can recruit the coast and can recruit Michigan. Do we still have an advantage over them just based on our continuity? Or is that going to creep up again where, hey, we're not preparing for these teams very well and their personnel is actually not much worse than ours. We don't recruit at a top 15 level clip. We recruited at a top 30 and now we're in an equal ball game with these guys and we don't know every one of their plays. We don't know how their coordinators behave. And it could get really interesting. I think this game is going to highlight how talented this team is because you're going to have to make some talented plays. You're not going to be able to sleepwalk through this game.
Well, I think it's a good time to highlight our depth concerns about the offense too. Mm-hmm. You can't have a similar offensive cataclysm that you had last year and expect to go win all these difficult road games. Everyone's got a QB now. Everyone's got a new upstart coach. You're not running into these downtrodden programs that you used to see in the Big Ten West. If you're going to throw out a horrible offense again, you can't just rely on your defense and special teams to carry you through because these teams will score eventually. These defenses will make you make plays against you. And truly, the success of the season depends upon keeping your top 3 or 4 offensive players healthy. And not necessarily healthy for every game, but we can't lose them for longer than 2 or 3 game stretches.
Yeah. All right, what do you got for this game?
I will say 27-20. think they're going to have a lot of success with their QB. I think he's outside of Ohio State. I'm most worried about what he presents from maybe Nebraska too.
I got 27-24. I think it's going to be a really close game. I think it's going to be one of those, like, you're sweating out a fourth quarter drive on either side of the ball for the win.
So next game would be Northwestern. They return a ton of offensive skill talent. I think they have even a lot of continuity back on defense.
And their offensive line, too. I think they can bring back at least 3 starters.
Who is their QB they brought in from the transfer?
Mike Wright.
Mike Wright. He's a Vanderbilt transfer.
Yep.
It's difficult to talk down to this team because no matter what situation they're in, how poor of a season they've had, how good of a season they've had, no matter what, they're going to be in a competitive game against Iowa because they base their selection process around intelligence. If you can approach Iowa's scheme with intelligence and thinking, at worst, you're going to be in a fourth quarter ball game with them.
Yeah.
It's really going to come down to how the ball bounces. I don't think we're going to be, head above them from an offense perspective where we can outscore them. And their offense obviously had sustained success against us last year, even without really having that many good players.
It didn't have a lot of success in the first half. In the second half, late in the game, they kind of found back-to-back drives moving the ball. Mike Wright, their quarterback they bring in, I don't actually expect him to start when we play him. I think they bring in another Jake Lausch, I think, is their backup QB. I expect him to start. Mike Wright looks like one of those guys where you're in camp and he just runs around and makes a bunch of plays and you have a hard time keeping him on the field because you can see easy first downs for a defensive-minded team. He can't throw. His stats reflect that. You throw in the film, it's a bad motion, it's inaccurate, it's slow. I think by the time we play him, I think they'll be more of a traditional power pro style set. The issue is with them, you play a defense that's playing identical to you. They're trying to play 2 high safeties. I think they were top 5 in amount of explosive plays they allowed, similar to us. They were bottom 5 in negative plays given, which is just like us. So you're going to play in this really long game no matter what. They build everyone really big and they recruit intelligent guys, as you mentioned. It's hard to not envision this game being 17-13 or 13-7. And I don't know if we're going to be aggressive enough on offense. I don't know if we'll be healthy enough on offense to really exploit them. But I see a game around that score.
And usually within Connecticut, the Northwestern game is just a little sleepy too. You're not getting the big game environment. There's expectations you're going to win the game, and that just creates a different Connecticut environment as a whole. You're not getting the loud third downs. You're not getting the noise on first and second. It just builds a sleepy atmosphere, and I think that's our fear, is that this could be the one that middle of the season games where if you're walking a little hurt, you're underestimating this team, it could end up being a real problem.
Yeah. And I think, I'd go with a prediction of 13-7. I think it's going to be a bunch of kids at the game. It's one of those weird rivalry games for Northwestern. It's not one for us. We don't consider them a rival, but they consider us one. And if you lack emotion in this type of game in the middle of the season, I could get really close. So I'm going to go 13-7.
I'll go 20-10. I think we'll have, again, this is all kind of building off the same point, but I truly believe in Cade and Lachey. I think all these teams are going to struggle to stop them, and hopefully we see some run game emerge as well. Mm-hmm. Hopefully there's
getting later in the year.
Yeah, starting to get later in the year too.
Yeah.
And you have experienced backs. We haven't had experienced backs in a long time.
Mm-hmm. So it's time to talk about Wisconsin up next.
Yep.
So we kind of called them last year. We kind of called their program's bluff. We said the way they're playing offense, they're trying to be like Ohio State. They're trying to recruit receivers. They're trying to recruit quarterbacks. And it played out just like that against us. They threw the ball 40 times. If they gave the ball to Braylon Allen 40 times in that game, they walked to a victory in the fourth quarter. They just refused to run the ball on a consistent basis. And it screwed them. And the reason why you do that, the reason why you kind of think about recruiting while you're playing a game and not just thinking about winning, is because you can bring in talented quarterbacks and receivers. And I think they've missed again. If their goal is to bring in, a top 5 QB or top 15 QB, they missed again. Van Dyke he's a good QB. He was really heralded 2 years ago at Miami. He kind of floundered the last 2 years and got benched this year at a program that's probably a little bit lesser than you, maybe equal to you. So you're bringing in a guy that's you don't want to. He's not going to play in the NFL. He's not going to compete against these high teams. But now you're in the system that requires him to throw the ball 40 times, 30 times. And unless they make that adjustment to going back into we're an offensive line, running back, and tight end based team, there's a reason why their win total is 5.5, 6.5. They don't really make sense right now. And they're going to have to make that adjustment.
Yeah, I think my fear with them is that they're going to have a really talented offensive line. And
100%.
We talk about learning from their mistakes. Watching back the film, just their impatience when it came to wanting to try and score from 30 yards out, wanting to try and score from 25 yards out, wanting to throw the deep ball on their own side of the field. You have to get that outside your brain when you're playing Iowa because you're just not going to catch us. Mm-hmm. Our first rule is just do no harm. Do not allow the big play. You're not going to slip one by us on first and second. If they can then apply that to staying on schedule, I think Van Dyke actually offers us some promise because of his arm strength. He's going to have the outside the numbers available to him. They have high-end receiver play. He's a decent runner himself, so we talk about that isolated QB run. He's a big enough guy to take the hits, and they're not going to be afraid about moving him off C and D gap. Mm-hmm. I see this almost moving more into a 50-50 game because of that fact and that they have a good defense. I don't really see where our advantage lies. I see them actually as very similar to us where they're going to have kind of a medium offense with a good defense. Mm-hmm. And when you have that familiarity now coming back again on round 2 against them, you might see what Iowa State employed in 2022, where it's like we just take 3 every single play and we keep on moving on. We're going to get that outside our brain that we need to score quick. We need to have explosive plays. We're just going to take what this team gives us, and I think they might be able to actually take it with their O-line.
Yeah, and I think that's where my prediction lies too. I don't see their defense as the elite unit it used to be. We were unfortunate last year to have Deacon play and Eric All get hurt in the first third drive. And when they actually didn't move up into an 8-man, 9-man box, we ran the ball well. And I expect us to run the ball, not for 200 yards, but maybe 130 against this defense. And they're kind of more of a secondary based team, and they're trying to play fast. They're trying to be quick around the ball and be able to blitz and show multiple sets. It's not really how you want to play Iowa. You kind of want to square us up how Minnesota does and how the Illini do. But I think the issue in this game and why it turns into a 50-50 game is that this is one of the very few programs that can be better on the offensive line than us in terms of our defensive line. And last year, even with how strong our defensive line was, they blocked us. And they got to the third level a lot. And Lucy's not Allen. He's not the NFL talent that Allen was, but he's not, he's still a B+, A- type of back that's going to have a shot at the third down back in the NFL. And I think that's what differentiates this game is that you get into the third and fourth quarter and, we're playing maybe only 2 D tackles. This is where D tackle depth might come into an issue. And I still think they might have a little better of an idea how to score against us than we will against them. I think they have the opportunity to just kind of fill the box and play man on the back end. And I don't know what our solution will be against them that will put us in a better situation late in the game.
Yeah, you said what they're like.
Unless they just throw the ball. I mentioned, unless they don't commit to that run game and their strength of this game, it's kind of almost like they kind of have to coach themselves out of this game because I think just on a personnel basis, they're a little better.
Definitely. And I think we're going to get into this as we go through every game, but the development of a run game is going to be just so important for Iowa as the season goes along. We've done personnel breakdowns on the O-line in the running back room, but hopefully having a jab in the passing attack, having a threat in the passing attack is going to lighten these boxes against them. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, we saw success within the running game against Wisconsin. Hopefully we'll see more against the likes of Nebraska as well as we get into that. But that's where as we get later into the season, having that run game really develop and flourish is how this game moves from 50-50 into a 60-40, 70-30 split. Mm-hmm. You want to do predictions on it though?
Yeah, I think maybe go a little more detail. They bring back majority of their skill. Their tight ends last year were true freshmen. They bring back now they're redshirt freshmen, sophomores. Pauling we knew he was good going into last year's game. He's really freaking good. He's still going to be the focus of their team.
He's going to be the top skill player we play outside of Ohio State's guys.
Yeah, he can really go. Bryson Green's a year back, another very strong player. They're going to have another bevy of 2 or 3 receivers that can make plays. With that feeling that their O-line is just going to be the differentiator in this. This is actually where I don't know for sure we're going to lose. This is our second loss, but between Iowa State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, the 4 rivalry games, I feel like all 4 of those teams have improved this year. Just, given the nature of their personnel and, being second-year programs for Wisconsin, Nebraska. I have a loss for this game. I could see it to be any of those 4 teams just because we're kind of flipping too many coins. And I'd go with Wisconsin 17-16 in a close game late.
I will take a win on this one just because it's at home. I think at best it's 50-50. I think the experience in the defense is really going to make it difficult on them. But yeah, I'll say a win in 2016.
Nice. All right, next, another trap game on the schedule for us at UCLA.
So this is actually where I have our loss. I think late in the season, if we're going to go on the run that I think we are, where it's going to be 7-1, 8-1 at this point in the season. When I watched film of them, they just looked like a complete team. Garbers is actually a very good QB. He seems to make the right decision a lot of the time. Have high-end receiver talent, have high-end O-line play, ran the ball well last year. Do they bring them back a lot on defense?
No, their defense is their defensive line is almost completely gone, and their linebackers are half of them are back. So they have a lot of turnover on defense, but where their strength is their offenses.
That's why I have fear of teams going into this season is, teams that bring back a lot on offense that were successful. And if you're going to compete and beat Iowa this year, it's going to have to be on the offense side of the ball. It's not going to be because you have a good defense.
Yeah. You bring in Bieniemy on the offense side of the ball. You bring in their head coach. Obviously, he completely pissed down his leg the opening press conference, but another NFL mind, two guys who's been in NFL offensive, coaching rooms. And it's their first time to coach against a defense at Iowa where you know what you're going to get. They understand how to attack quarters defense, cover three, and man-to-man, that they're going to see very simple looks for 80% of the games. They might have, and this might be a very important game for their job security going forward. You have the ability to beat this kind of premier, probably a top 15 program at this time in rankings, maybe top 10 even. And you can show and showcase your program off being we can compete with this program and maybe beat them in a huge game for that program.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, going out west for Iowa has never worked out well. You have that out west game. It's going to be a Friday night. It's just going to be a weird timing. I could see it really being – I don't even know if you consider it a trap game because UCLA could end up having a pretty decent year with the guys that bring it back. But yeah, my prediction will be 27-21 loss.
Mm-hmm. I'll go with a 24-20 win. I think it's one of those games where their defensive turnover is too much. And honestly, my hope for this not being the trap game is that it's a first-year program late in the year. And maybe they're 4-5 at this point, and there's the coaches are being Bieniemy's known for being kind of a stickler, kind of a prick. Maybe he's wearing down this program. Maybe they're trying to move guys out into the portal and kind of building this new identity. But if they are playing 6-3 ball or 6-2 ball at the time, I think that's where that loss comes in. I'm going to go with the win here, but it's definitely another tricky spot. Similar to the Michigan State game where good coaches, good personnel, a lot more talent than you expect at those programs, and it'll be a close game.
Yeah, so next is Maryland, team that just really almost the antithesis of Iowa football, like to chuck the ball around, have discipline issues. Certainly when we've played in the past, they've had multiple personal fouls, seem to give up pretty quickly in the games if things aren't going their way. We got eyes on their transfer QB who's going to be the projected starter again.
MJ Morris. This late into the season, we might not be seeing him because I did not see what everyone else sees in him. I don't know how he's going to go from starting QB to starting QB in two programs. He's an athlete, but he doesn't have high run numbers. Not a big guy.
His passing numbers are poor, and he seems to be turnover prone as well. It might just be a fact where they don't have anyone else to offer at this point, or they're waiting for their guys to develop. But they do have a pretty good defense that they're bringing back. But are you going to get a road game crowd that's going to be anything that late in the season for Maryland?
Yeah.
It's going to be probably getting pretty cold by then.
I think this is a transition year for them. Yeah. I think you lose Talia. They bring back a good amount of the receivers. Obviously, they always have receiver talent there. Mm-hmm. But they lose 4 of their 5 offensive line who struggled to run the ball last year. And they're just not interested in running the ball. It's honestly, it's kind of not a very serious program in my eyes. Loxley's, he's kind of built this thing where we're going to go chuck it around try to score 40 points a game. We're going to lose to the good teams. We're going to have 4 losses to them, to anyone we play that's above a top 25 team. We're going to beat the 8 teams below us, maybe lose one of those. And we're just not really concerned with ever changing that profile. And, maybe it's just reality of Maryland football. It's a basketball school. It's not, it's around a bunch of professional NFL teams. There's not much pressure on him to do more than that. And it's kind of a program that's kind of capped out. And it feels like a capped out program that's now kind of going through this, who are we? We might not even be good on offense type of team. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those games where we could kind of, if we're struggling at the time, maybe have 2 or 3 losses. This is a get right situation where what Ferentz does so well in his program is never to lose teams. He never loses the locker room. I think he's only lost it once in his career in 2010. It's like a lost the locker room moment. If we're a 2 or 3 loss team, we're going to come out and this is the national title game. Like you're playing a lot of seniors in their last few games. You never lose that kind of edge that Iowa, can play in November with. And they've been like 16-1 in their last like 17 November games, maybe in like 19-1 now in the last 5 years. I think we roll in this game. I think it's one of those shockingly weird road games where you have a big Iowa crowd show up and we win like 31-14.
Yeah, them taking a step back on offense, that if they don't have offense, they have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm on the same vibe as you.
Yeah.
Especially late season where they could be sitting at like 4-5.
Yeah.
Are they going to show up with the willpower to play the most physical team in football?
All right. Well, I think it brings us to our last game, Nebraska. Year after year, this game gets under my skin more and more, and their fan base does. It's just, I can't imagine having a losing season 8 straight years and talking the way Nebraska fans talk about Iowa. You look at Iowa the last 8 years in Nebraska, it's not separated much by the games. The talent has not been much different. Generally, both programs in the top 30 every year. But they've not gone over the hump for even making a bowl game. And Iowa's consistently won those nail-biting wins against not just Nebraska, but every team in the West. And it's just based on the confidence that these programs have in the fourth quarter. And it's not just lucky bounces that, some people want to say. It's not just Nebraska's just cursed or something like that. But it comes down to just having a program that knows how to finish and knows how to win. And it's not better exemplified between those two programs.
Well, I think it also comes into how we call our games. Like Iowa does not really show its hand until its last possible moment. It's really saving a lot of its play calls for late drives. It's saving a lot of its defensive calls for really important moments in games.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of teams want to come out and start fast. They want to expend their planned plays. Iowa builds almost their entire scheme around being successful in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as you mentioned, that confidence, Nebraska exists on the inverse of that. Where when things get tight late, they're just waiting for who's going to make the mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't have a memory to build on for, why are we going to be successful? That insecurity and anxiety reaches a point where they end up making the giant mistake almost every year, it seems. And I think the difference in this year's equation is because they now have a quarterback.
Right.
He's going to be a freshman. So he's going to have to, and again, we're going to mention it one more time, but not having experience with these very complicated zone teams, it's going to be his first time playing this level of defense and this level of complexity. But because he is such a big body guy, he's going to be available to run the run game. He's going to have the big arm that can actually scare us from not playing too far underneath.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to be a very accurate dude too. So if he's playing at a high level and confident, I don't think he has the receiver room or the tight end or O-line and running back play to put up serious numbers on Iowa.
Yeah.
But I could see in a tight game him being the difference where we actually have to make some plays to beat this team.
Yeah, and you were, when he committed to Nebraska, I think every single Iowa fan was hoping he wouldn't be the next guy. And then you watch his spring game and you instantly understand why he got the 5-star rating. He's just immensely talented guy. And the kind of the most concerning portion as an Iowa fan watching him play is the composure he had in that game. His ability to extend plays and keep his eyes downfield, the way he navigated the pocket, and then his arm pacing in any different, he had 4 or 5 different types of throws and he could throw them all differently. It wasn't like he just had I have my fastball and that's all I have. It's not like a Deacon situation. But I actually think the thing about Nebraska's team last year that was, a perceived elite strength of theirs was their defense. And I actually expect that to take a downturn, not to be only a top 50 unit, but I think they'll be around a top 30 unit rather than a top 10, maybe top 25, just based on the teams they're going to play this year. Their schedule last year, similar to Iowa, where you kind of had this inflated defensive number of, allowing less than 10 points in a amount of games. But they lose 2 of their linebackers that were stalwarts of that defense and really helped that defensive coordinator in his first year in Reimer and Heinrich. And they're both well-recruited guys. And I remember Reimer was even playing in 2020 against us. And I don't think you can write off losing those 2 linebackers in a second-year program where, if you're going to back up and kind of play an intelligent level of defense, your linebacker play is very important to that. So I think I look to that to be, one, they have to replace those guys. And 2, I don't see an immense amount of NFL talent on their defensive team. Even when we played them last year, we had moments of success because they just weren't that fast or that, explosive. And I don't think their personnel's changed that much on defense going into this year. And I think that's what's going to lead to a defensive unit that's it shouldn't be as hyped as it is at this moment. And I think even though they're going to have an immense improvement in offense, I looked for their defense to kind of take a step back.
Well, and the interesting caveat is that this is going to be played at night in November.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, having probably your best QB play you're going to have in a long time, it's going to be negated to a certain extent, especially if that game's windy, especially if that game's cold.
Yeah.
I would imagine both of those are going to be taking place on that night. And then add the equation of him now being in Kinnick Stadium for the first time and having that nerves. It's not going to be a spring game where no one's hitting you. It's going to be a game where guys are trying to take your head off.
Yeah. I think you make a good point about their skill too. Their running backs they're good. They're good. And they have 3 of them, and they can rotate. And like Nebraska running backs have been good for a decade since we watch them closely, and even obviously longer than that.
Wasn't blown away by their O-line though.
Wasn't blown away by their O-line. The receivers have been kind of the same guys for a long time too. It's just a bunch of guys that are kind of fringe NFL. They got 2 of them that are pretty talented. The rest are okay. Kemp was their stud last year, and the one guy we were worried about going into the year, and he's gone now. So it's going to be kind of a reset there of like who is our true number 1. Fedoni's obviously got a good tight end. He's nothing that's going to be like we can't guard him. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird equation. I don't think they're immensely talented in their skill, their O-line, and their defense, not an elite level. But you had this like kind of weird piece in where I expect Viola to be gone in 3 years and play like a first round draft pick. But we just get him in his first year. So it's going to be a great game. I think it's a good story for Nebraska as a fan base that Rule is going to kind of play an Iowa type of scheme. We're going to run the ball and play defense. But now you kind of add this like chess piece in that Iowa hasn't been able to recruit in the terms of a 5-star quarterback. And it kind of adds, it's what Wisconsin wanted. Wisconsin was hoping to bring in a guy like this, and Nebraska got him just because he was a legacy recruit. And it's interesting how he changes his program to, cater to him.
Yeah, but it'd be interesting they do take the next step, or if you have, a catastrophic years and he's looking elsewhere to go play.
Right.
Because an interesting part about college football is like you can have QBs who are really talented step onto teams. Like we even saw Cade last year, had decent talent to throw to. But it wasn't, Michigan where these guys are considerably better than his opponents. And your numbers are not going to look that much different than if you were a 3-star recruit, just because guys aren't getting that open. Like you can get the ball 70 yards downfield, but is your guy going to be there, or is he going to have space?
Yeah.
Potentially not. I don't think that Nebraska has that high-end receiver play that's going to make Iowa panic.
Right.
I think it's maybe the underneath stuff where he can be tricky enough and talented enough where he can make a difference.
And you think too, he's got the pressure of the world on him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I haven't heard been discussed yet, but Mertz was the same story. Mertz went to Wisconsin as like the 5-star, and it was like they landed their guy. Like Wisconsin's always ran the ball and played defense. Now they have their quarterback, and it's almost an identical storyline of like he went to the program he shouldn't have. He's the prodigal son, and the problem is when you have that moment, your expectations and your pressure is insane. So all of a sudden you come out and you lose 3 of your first 7 games, and you're 4-3, and maybe you're struggling. That mental development early in the quarterback's career of not trying to do too much and just kind of playing within the offense, it could be something he has a hard time developing. And we've seen, even Aller last year go through a mind-breaking moment against Michigan where he completely fell apart. And no matter how talented you are, the mental side of quarterback is how they are separated. So even if you throw the best ball in the world, you still have to channel yourself and kind of compartmentalize your brain to play in those moments. And that has yet to be seen, and we'll see it definitely in the Iowa game.
You can't replicate high-level Big Ten football.
Yeah.
From a stress perspective. Are you going to black out because you're in nerves? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be completely rattled?
Is your hand going to stay still?
And that's why that level of guy, there's why the number of guys who can play that position is such a small number. Mm-hmm. How is it possible that every single kid grows up throwing the football, but 8 of them can play high-level NFL QB? It's because of that selection process, because only so many of them are wired correctly for that game day experience.
Mm-hmm. So what do you have for a prediction?
This one I have a win. I think going to rely on freshman QB.
Yeah,
that's a hell of a thing to walk into. That might be a really big game that might have playoff implications. I think you end up winning that game 24. I'll go 24-20.
Yeah, I think that is the crescendo to this Iowa defense is the amount of seniors they have. I'm going to go 13-9. You think about that moment, what that could be in Kinnick. if you're a 1-loss team, a 2-loss team, and you're kind of vying for either a Big Ten title appearance or, sneaking in the back door to the playoff. When Kinnick gets that kind of powder keg feeling and then you get a night game against Nebraska, it's going to be a rare situation. And I think that's what's going to drive this game is going to be just the moment of it. And it could be for, a massive ending to the season. So I think that's what's going to kind of drive my prediction more than I do see it being a very good game.
Yeah. And I think this is a good place to just kind of go into predictions on the whole season. So we said 10-2. You have yours built into essentially one of the losses is going to be to Ohio State. The other one's going to be to one of the rivalry teams.
One of the rivals, yeah.
I think one of these tough road games, honestly, MSU or UCLA, where you don't have maybe the emotional stake you usually would. You don't have the preparation. And then you run into a fairly good QB and a fairly good team. But yeah, 10-2 is likely going to be a playoff team. We've had this discussion amongst each other a couple times, but there's going to be teams within the schedule that have good seasons. Iowa State could have a sneaky good season. Washington could have a sneaky good season. Wisconsin, even Minnesota. If you end up collecting 2 or 3 wins against teams that are probably top 30, you keep it close against Ohio State. It's likely going to be a loss on the road for that second one.
Yeah.
To a team that ends up winning 9 or 8 games.
Yeah.
I still think you slip into at least a 12 or 11 seed. You can't have a demonstrably bad offensive season where you have these really skewed metrics and they can't justify you going over some SEC team.
Yeah.
And you have to be healthy too. You can't be limping in either.
Yeah.
I disagree. Can't be down Cade, can't be down Lachey.
Yeah, I disagree. I think 11-1 is the only hope in. I think because even with a close loss to Ohio State, there's only one team.
But you're not playing in the Big Ten title game.
I get that, but there's only one team on this schedule projected over 8 wins. And that's Ohio State. Nebraska is 7.5. So if it's an 8-win Nebraska team and they beat you, they're going to circle that game. You had them at home. And there's not many road games where, unless Minnesota's but they're going to put Minnesota in above you. So whoever beats you, if they're 10-2, they're going to put that team above you. And so if you're a 10, and also you have to go against every 9-3 SEC team that beat a top 15 Ole Miss team on the road.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to have that marquee win. So who's your marquee win?
Yes, you could say win totals are not over 7.5. I guarantee you there's at least 2 teams that get over a 7.5 win total, maybe even 3. So then if you have 3 8-win teams that you beat,
yeah, that's
going to be enough.
Is an 8-win team in the eyes of the committee enough? Because I think that what they want to see is either you would have to lose in almost horrible fashion to Ohio State, last second touchdown, right? Where you stepped on that field and it looked like you belonged with them, and maybe you had another unlucky loss. That's my only way I could see 10 wins, because you have to look like you played with somebody really good. And they're not going to allow you just to have a good schedule, easy schedule and get in. They want to see you, hey, if we put you on a primetime top 12 matchup, national televised game, you're not going to lose by 30. And I think that's what you need, that marquee win. And unless you go 11-1 and just have a resume that's undeniably a top 12 resume, I think they'll keep you out.
Well, and it also really depends on how well you play in those 10 wins. You're going to have to be a dominant team in those 10 wins.
You have to be 20 points better than a lot of mid-tier programs.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to really flex.
And hopefully that actually puts some pressure on Kirk to turn ratchet up some points in those games.
Right.
And that's been something we really didn't have to rely on because it was just win-loss and get to a Big Ten title. We always knew it was going to be an eye through, thread in the needle. But now there's going to be incentive behind putting up good numbers.
Yeah.
If you're going to want to be a playoff team, you have to dominate
that resume.
Iowa State. You have to dominate Minnesota. And I think it's a move they need to start moving into just because of recruiting numbers. You can't have a guy sitting down anti-recruiting Iowa from Minnesota, from Wisconsin, from Illinois even, and be like, look at this, look where their numbers are at compared to everyone else in the Big Ten. Yes, they are a good team. Yes, they probably offer you a better chance to be in the playoff, beat us eventually.
Yeah.
But is it what's best for you? And that's an arc and a narrative that really needs to change this year if we're going to see an evolution under Lester. If we're going to see Kirk move into this next system, it is adding a little bit of panache to Iowa football.
Definitely. Well, I think we both end up with 10-2, missing the Big Ten title game. You got us in the playoff still. I got us missing the playoff just barely. And I think there's going to be a lot of angry fans about that because there'll be some, Auburn at 9-3 that'll bounce us. But either way, I think this schedule just lines up to be really exciting. It's not a Big Ten West schedule where you're playing, you have 6 games on the schedule you're for sure going to win. It kind of more lines up where you maybe only have 3 or 4 that you feel very confident in and 8 or 9 that are going to be a 1-score game in the 4. So it's going to be a really exciting year.
Well, I think what makes it really exciting too is just being a 2-loss team or even a 1-loss team to Ohio State at any point in the season, you're never out of it. I think that's going to make the college football as a whole, nationwide, a far more better product because you're going to have gigantic implicating games in November and October between 2-loss and 3-loss teams that you haven't had in the past that have national title implications. And that's something we have experience with college football. And it's why you usually see kind of like late November, the interest in college football fades because you only have 2 or 3 matchups a weekend that actually matter.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, let's have a good season.
Yep. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.